I'm Device from Australis, and welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel. It's a joke-free zone.
See this? Classic book on the occult. You know, occult phenomena. ESP. Oh, ESP. You probably thought I was talking about esports pools, which, you know what, it's kind of scary. It's a bit creepy how they have so many great contests, both fantasy and betting, right? And I'm not talking about side effects that to some degree appear to be tangible, like remote viewing or certain abilities of meditation to produce certain brainwave temperature changes in the body. When I say, if you've got kind of an intuition or a feel or a read for who's going to do well in a tournament, perhaps pick them in a fantasy team, or if the odds are good for you, perhaps pick them in a betting contest, assuming you are of legal age and within a state or country which allows such. Now then, k0nfig, formerly of North, now of OpTic Gaming, is not just a very confident player. I would actually say he stands out as one of the most confident we have in the entire CSGO scene. If you were to make a list of the players who just exude confidence, they play with confidence, everything about their game tells you they really believe that they're the best or they're one of the best and that they can do whatever they want, he'd be top of your list. Now, yes, he was one of the best players in the world, but even aside from that, I think you can see players who aren't some of the best who have a certain confidence or a swagger about them. And I think the key thing you got to start out and say, and why I think Denmark will really miss k0nfig's confidence, is because it seems very genuine. It doesn't seem like an act or a front or it's put on in any way. It's not fake, essentially. And I have to tell you, if you only watch interviews or you only listen to vlogs or you watch players' streams, a lot of the players who might appear confident or say they're confident, it is to some degree fake. Not always intentionally. Like, yes, some of them will just say things for the sake of the crowd, for showmanship. Sure, that's cool. Or they'll say things because they believe their team's really good and they believe they can win in that way. But are they individually confident? I think some of these players, from getting to know some, especially the younger ones, they either want to be like that, so they're trying to fake it till they make it. They're trying to be, oh no, I don't get affected by pressure. That's the thing a lot of young stars have told me, the ones who actually have failed in the big finals. Nah, pressure doesn't get to me. That was just an off day. You know, they actually are going the other way and lying to themselves and everyone else when they haven't actually worked to build up their level of confidence. And that's another interesting part, I think, about k0nfig, actually, is that he didn't just come out of the gate like this. That's why it does seem very genuine right now. While those other players from day one might try and put on that trash-talking persona or say that they're very confident, they don't get affected by pressure. If you notice, when he was in SK Gaming in 2015, and then when he got into Dignitas, but it was the Kirby show early on, and he was just another player, you didn't hear all this barking, you didn't hear all this talking, you didn't see him as such an amazingly confident player. In his own context, he was reasonably confident and was trying to figure his way out through his career. But you notice, once he got very good is when this all came on and flourished, and he really has embraced this and unleashed the element of his persona. And so I think the fact that it's grounded in being a very good player at Counter-Strike, being one of the most skilled that we have in the whole world, is a factor that is not to be lost, because there are a lot of fantastic players. I'll go through some of these Danish players in a minute, and you'll see some of them have amazing skill level, amazing consistency, ability to perform, have won massive championships, but they aren't always the most confident players, and they don't have a confidence that's necessarily rooted in how good they are at the game. Sometimes they're so good at the game that when they have lack of confidence, or they fall down in a big semi-final or final, thinking of people like Device, you think, what went wrong? You're one of the best players in the world. What do you not know that you are? How are you losing to, for example, OpTic in E-League Season 2? You're better than everyone on the server right now. How do you not kind of believe that yourself? How can you not execute upon that and make that your foundation? Some people can't. So when you get these rare individuals who can, you've got to really hold on to that. That's a really valuable, it's worth its weight in gold, is that quality. Now, as I've just alluded to there, one of the problems with confidence is, especially this kind of innate confidence that's almost unshakable, is that it's very hard to teach, if not impossible, and likewise to even encourage. If someone has a bit of it, you can sort of fan those flames, but they have to kind of discover it themselves. They often actually have to overcome, either they're just exceptional prodigy people who just seemingly have it all the time and everything works for them, or they have to overcome some really difficult situation that then makes them kind of anti-fragile, to use that Nassim Taleb comment, or kind of breaks them in a specific way that to recover from it, like building up your muscles only makes you stronger afterwards, and then you can't be kind of destroyed because you've already been down that route and you've seen the worst and you no longer fear it in that way. So it's very tough to create a person like that who has that iron confidence. And so when you consider you kind of have to have it, or it has to develop naturally, again, you can't just say, well, I'm going to have this guy and I'm going to have this guy and we're going to work on him. You can have sports psychologists, there's plenty of them out there. Astralis has them themselves. They can work with different people in different ways, but you can't ensure these results, and you can't always imbue someone with the qualities that you want. So when you get a player those qualities, again, it's important to harness that. It's important that you balance out your team with some of those people. Because one of the things, I've often made this case before, so I won't go too deeply into it, but there's a famous story about Kobe Bryant, the now legendary shooting guard, one of the best players of all time in the NBA, who early in his career, he had to be a secondary star or the sidekick to Shaquille O'Neal, who was the best player, the most dominant force in the NBA. And in these early days, Kobe was someone who was always grasping for something that was slightly out of his reach. He wanted to be better. He wanted to be the best player on his team. He wanted to be the best player in the NBA. He wanted to be the best player ever. And so early on, when they wanted him to play more of a role, that used to piss the coaches off. I mean, he actually had the best coach in the NBA, Phil Jackson, already 6-time champion at that point in time. And Phil Jackson's assistant coaches would say to Phil Jackson, like, he's breaking the system again. He's not playing within the triangle. He's taking too many shots. He's taking bad shots. He's dribbling too much. He's trying off showboat moves. He's not passing the ball as much. We want to play as more of a point guard. And what Phil Jackson basically said is, sure, yeah, he's doing things right now that we don't want him to do, and he's playing with almost too much confidence in some ways, but you never want to beat that out of him, because that one day when everything else in his game is assembled and behind him and he's in the right position with the right team will make him a great player, and that's something that will make him one of the best players in the world of all time. So if you beat that out of him early, or you tell him that's wrong and you make him second guess himself, you might never get that back. And the idea, the corollary is, you don't get many players like that. So again, it's a rare quality. Now, one of the reasons why I also think k0nfig's confidence is genuine is because when I've heard those other young players, the other young stars, other very good players, champions even, tell me, no, I have lots of confidence. I always believe I'm the best. I believe my team's going to win. I look at them in the game and they start to play passive in a massive game. They start to crumble and not be able to do the things they want to do. They go into a match, they're playing against a team that they should beat, and they have an off game. They're playing against a team that's better than them, and then they just break entirely. One of the really impressive things, actually, I've found about k0nfig, and I've watched him the entire time he's been in Dignitas, is he doesn't really seem to crumble or choke. Even when you go back to before he was the star of the team, and then the whole time that he was the star in 2017, yes, he can have bad games, and especially with such an aggressive playing style and at times playing an entry role, rushing in with an AK in a very tactically set team, you're going to die a lot, yes. But he tends to get his numbers, he tends to get his damage per round, he tends to get his round openings and his entries and his kills, and he tends to get his no matter whether or not Dignitas or North wins or whether Dignitas or North loses. Now, he's had a few scenarios, notably actually against Virtus Pro, a couple of the majors, where he had particularly bad games and he didn't kind of get his damage overall and he looked a bit off. But even then, his whole team got destroyed in some of these games or had an entire run of a half where it was going super, super badly for him. So I can't necessarily blame that on him when I look at the rest of his career. And most of the times when his team's lost, you think of the two finals to G2, he was playing like an absolute stud. He was playing like somebody who could have been the MVP of the tournament. You look at some of the other tournaments when they've gone out in upset matches, he's still having maps where he's having amazing impact and looking like one of the strongest players. Generally, he's a guy who plays up to a certain level and doesn't seem to get affected by the others around him, which is another key detail, because one of the reasons why you need these confidence guys is they will balance out the players in your team who don't have as much confidence. It's like when I was making this video about Nip Magic, about Exist leaving NIP. It's actually significant from the Magic side of things that Exist leaves, because Exist was a guy who would pull out these ballsy clutches in the big matches. Likewise, Freiburg would have big games at majors where he'd play way better than he would elsewhere. Obviously, get right, classic clutch round player. You look at some of the other names in the team, they weren't particularly clutch. Forrest isn't some monster clutch player. He's not always the guy who's the big game player who turns up. He's a bit wishy-washy, right? He's here some days, he's not another day. If he's here, cool. Oh, wow, Forrest is so good. If he isn't, crickets, no one says anything, right? So is that guy as confident? Does he really believe he's the best? He's got a lot of skill, but does he? So you've got to balance these players out, because when you do that, then you get in a position where actually their ability to have their own internal confidence and the fact they don't break means that even if other parts of the team have issues, there's always a baseline level that they're going to go down to, and that can actually provide respite to where the game continues. You don't just lose the game outright, and the other players pick it up again. They come back. They have their rounds. They have their half. They have their map later in a series that they can have impact on. That's one of the reasons why it's key in these teams to have them. Likewise, I'll give you a quick breakdown of SK Gaming. For me, in SK Gaming, the really clutch players in this team would be Cold Zero first and foremost, and he's clutch in every sense. Big game player, mid-round player, late-round player, fantastic at all the maps. So that's an amazing fundament to have for your team there. Fallen obviously has had some of the most epic playoff games, usually one-off maps that we've ever seen, and an amazing clutch player. Then I would say to a lesser degree, that's why you then see someone like Taco come along and have these big moments and feel like he's freed up, because he's not required to do that. He doesn't even need to do that sometimes to win a game or to win a half. So then he's freed up to have this confidence that he does his job already. And then if he can get some extra kills, hey, that's all bonus. So I think it frees a guy like that up in a way that he wouldn't be in a lesser team, like when he was on the Games Academy squad. FNX obviously wasn't such a great fragger when he was in Luminosity, but he had a really nice clutch overall game, but more clutch, not in the sense of like having big games, but he's going to win literal clutches for you. And so now you also know in a game, hey, we can afford to take chances with another player because later on in the round, we've got these guys behind us. So again, they imbue the confidence and that clutchness to the rest of the team in that sense. So the reason why this is significant for me is because actually Danish CS, and in general actually the Nordic region, but I'll get to that later, Danish CS hasn't had many players like that ever in history, quite frankly. I mean, part of it, I would say, is that psychologically, they have tended to always rely on the notion that the team concept, often being tactical teams and teams that have a very good balance of roles, the team concept will always win out over the individual. And that's why you also don't see in a lot of the Danish teams in history many superstar players. Like, they might become superstars within their team system and then they're their best player, so by default they might become a superstar. But you don't see like Simples and Nikos very often from the Danish scene. You just don't get that kind of wild talent that's just outrageous and sometimes plays outside of the system even. They tend to generally focus more on that tactical hierarchy that they have, and therefore that's where their natural confidence comes from. It's how well is the team playing? How's everyone doing their job? It's not about the individual as much. I mean, there's a famous thing, it's called the law of Jante, which I'll link in the description box below, which comes from the Nordic region, which is about this idea that you don't kind of put yourself ahead of others and you shouldn't think of yourself as better than other people. It's kind of ingrained in their culture, and I do think that's actually one of the reasons why in team games, particularly CS, that region's produced so many amazing teams, but it's not as good for having the superstar that's super confident and then dominates overall. And I do think actually that if you look at the greatest teams in CS history and you look at the greatest teams in any team sport, yes, you've got to have a great team, you've got to have good balance, and you've got to have pieces that work together and a style that's coherent to get to the top. But because when you get to the very, very top, you're going to have 2 or 3 teams that are like that, oftentimes the team winning most of the big championships and being the truly greatest had either the best player on, and more often than that, the best player and a player who had a special type of confidence that boasted the team. It doesn't always have to be the best player. You can have a different player in the team who can be a very confident individual, but you often have to have both of those factors to put you over the top. That's why superstar players have that term superstar more than just being a very good star player. We set them aside because they can win you the whole game in the championship once you're at that top level. So if you look at the rest of the Danish scene, this is why I think actually that the fact that k0nfig isn't in North and he isn't in Astralis, these 2 teams that were in position to potentially be top teams and do great things, and now he's off in a team that no one knows what's going to happen in OpTic yet, and even if he does, sure, it's 60% Danish, but it's not really a Danish org and a Danish team in the same way. So I think the Danish scene, North and Astralis, are really going to miss the fact that neither of them's going to have k0nfig. I think that is going to subtract something that even if you can match it in terms of his game, there's other players as good as him in Denmark, you're going to be missing this special quality. Because let's go through some of these names. So we'll start at the top. Who's the best player from Denmark of all time in CSGO? Who's the best player probably right now from Denmark? I mean, admittedly, he hasn't been for a few months. Got to be Device, right, from Astralis. Okay, Device has powered his team to many semi-finals, many finals. He has been the MVP of certain tournaments, like, for example, ECS Season 2, I would say Star Series Season 3, the best player at these competitions. Problem is, he's disappeared in many finals. He's a godlike player in quarterfinals, nowadays in semi-finals, often in a key map, even in losses before the final. But you put him in a big final, yeah, he wilts a little bit. He doesn't play up to his insane ability level. He doesn't seem to have a natural confidence that draws from how well-rounded his game is and how well he fits into the concept of his team. He's a guy where he can just go missing. And so in his team, you're going to need to balance it out with some confidence, right? Let's look at another player from his team. We've got Dupree. Okay, here's the thing about Dupree. I've never thought of him as an outright choker, but my problem with him is he is a good player and he has a level of confidence in himself and the team, but he doesn't have the alpha personality to be like the lead wolf of the pack. He doesn't have the mentality to be the superstar player of the team in that kind of a sense. And so he can take you a certain distance, but you can need someone else to balance it out and to take you that extra level. What about Glaive as an in-game leader? Because remember, in-game leaders have a certain confidence level and a certain mentality for the game. The thing with Glaive is he embodies what the Danish scene's about in this sense for me, because his confidence in what he relies upon are his strats and his calls. And if he's making the right calls, he's making the right strats, the game can be going badly. Sure, he's not going to be broken in terms of confidence because he knows what the right answer might be or what a good solution is, or he's making an adaptation. But does he have amazing confidence in that sense? Does he imbue his team with confidence? He tries to set it up that we want to do these tactics, but he doesn't seem like a guy who has like the ability to lift morale, to make people believe that this tactic's going to work. I'll tell you a great story. One of the epic Na'Vi versus MTW finals took place in 2010, where these are the two best teams of the year. Na'Vi won the majority of the tournaments, all the majors. MTW, second best team in the world, amazing Danish team, but sadly lost every series to Na'Vi. And one of the key backbreakers for them was they got to the World Cyber Games final in 2010. And in the final, they had a series that went 3 maps, and on the third map it was Train, a map both teams were amazing at, but was Na'Vi's best map. It went to overtime. I think it was even double overtime. And in this, and just before the overtime session, MTW was actually leading in the game and were in really good position to win the tournament. They were on a scenario where Na'Vi was on CT side, where you need your full economy, you need that AWP, you need all the utility. And this is Train T side. So if you have all the economy and utility in your very good Train T side team, you can pick apart a team that hasn't got full buy. And basically, Na'Vi, I think MTW is 2 rounds from victory. Na'Vi had the choice. Either we save and play for overtime. Let me think, was that it? I can't remember the scenario, but anyway. They did a really risky buy with like 3 farm asses or something and did like a full rush on the outside. Again, a scenario where you can get picked apart if you haven't got anything. And this round worked and was won. And when I asked, I think it was Senya at the time or Markelov, one of them, they basically said that Zeus just told them, I've got a read on them. We're going to do this. We're going to do a force buy. We're going to rush outside. By the way, you force bought a lot less in 1.6 and especially not on CT side. We're going to do this and it's going to work. And we're going to do this and it's going to win us the tournament. Some crazy line like that. So he had the strat and then he had the confidence in it and then he imbued it in his team and it worked. And they got to the scenario. Is Glaive doing that? I don't know about that. I think Glaive can find a solution and he starts applying it. It starts to work and you start thinking, hey, he knows what he's doing here. But does he put the individual confidence into you? Yeah, that's kind of a unique quality. What about Kirby? Okay, here's the thing about Kirby. If you look at his game, you'd think he should be crazy confident. I mean, he actually has a game that's quite similar to k0nfig's in some sense. He's got this nutty first bullet aim. He likes to move around a lot, likes to take a lot of fights, seems to play as though he thinks he's a very confident player. But first of all, that tends to cost him a lot. Like actually, he tends to overplay his aim, as it were, and take too many aim duels instead of sometimes playing an angle. Then you look at him as a personality. He's a very soft-spoken guy. He's not got a very dominant personality. He just wants to be one of the players and sometimes have great performances. And I actually like the way he talks up the fact that he wants to be a better player and a great player. But does he really believe it yet? Some days yes, some days no. What about Zipnix? Because here's the thing, you're going to think to yourself, come on, Zipnix, this guy's so clutch, he's so amazing under pressure. Here's the thing, I'll give you this. I do think Zipnix is a confident player. And I do think that somehow in all those clutch scenarios, he never gives up and he's always processing it like a computer, figuring out what the ideal optimal play is. But he's not the superstar player. He can only do so much for you. He can get you into a couple of scenarios. If you put him in position to be in those clutches, he can win you some of them. But is he going to take over the whole game? Not very often. Is he going to win you a game outright? Probably not. Is he going to win you a massive final when you're in it? He'll get you some key rounds, but he's not going to be the main force that does it. And also his confidence is entirely limited to him. He's not a guy who's as amazing at communicating things beyond tactical stuff inside the game. So he's not going to pump you up and he's not going to necessarily lead by example in that sense. He's just going to do his job. So confident, but to a degree, kind of in line with the Dupree example. Okay, how about k0nb? Right, here's the thing. When k0nb's going off, and he hits that ceiling that you saw in 2015 and odd times in early 2017 and in North. He has amazing games where he's such a streaky player. He can go off with the AWP, he can go off with the rifles, he can have a very good pistol at times, nice deagle. But I've seen him against many elite teams. And against elite teams, when his team was down, yes, Device was the main person choking. But KGB could get really sapped, especially if it was late in a big final or a big semi-final and things were going badly. That guy, I mean, famously, he was something of a rager. He's a guy who his confidence could fall apart in his team, and then it could fall apart in himself, and then he could question what he's supposed to do as a player. I think his confidence was as streaky as his game, quite frankly. Okay, how about k0n? Right, here's the bizarre thing. Against certain teams, I mean, k0n has shown this himself when he was in TSM against Fnatic, the best team in the world, best team of all time, still for my money. And he was actually dominating them on a regular basis, outplaying them in every sense in the game, map-wise, how they were going to play against them, scouting them, changing up the veto, knowing that next time we're going to adapt and we're going to beat them in a different way than we just beat them before. We, in theory, could do the same thing. So here's the thing. You apply that in the modern day against his former team, Astralis. Very confident player, right? Amazing player. Put him against a lot of NA teams. He's done fucking amazingly generally. But you know what? Put him against the right teams. Yeah, that confidence can disappear. So you go ahead and obvious example you're going to want me to say is SK Gaming, right? Well, yes, clearly against SK Gaming, in all of his teams, he's had some sort of a mental block. He's had some sort of an issue. Somehow his style starts to degrade. He doesn't seem to play the same way as he does against all the other teams. Then you add in, I'd go ahead and say, look at NIP. Not only did he lose the IEM final to them, but when he used to be over in TSM and Astralis, they lost way too many series to NIP. And at times when they were already much better than NIP, it was their time to get kind of even the historical record, but still happened. And then you also have to add in, he doesn't play in Danish teams anymore. So it doesn't really matter what k0n's confidence level if he isn't on a Danish team and we're talking about the Danish scene, right? What about Valde? Okay, here's the thing. I actually think Valde has a chance to be one of these players. I think he has a quiet confidence. He doesn't have to brag as much, but he does know that he's worked on his game. He does want to be better. He can see the gap, but I think he knows he can make it. You've seen him already have those early monster games in North, so you've already seen there's some potential there. I also think if you look at his clutch ability, he is kind of in the mold of a Xyp9x. But what's great about Valde is he's combining the Xyp9x aspect with the big fragging potential star play. And that's where it's getting exciting. Because if he can do that, now I could see him developing into one of these players. Even so, he's going to be a confident star player who can win you clutches. Now that's very valuable, but he's not necessarily going to be the guy who pumps the others up in the same way, who gets them going and makes them think, hey, I'll follow that guy into battle. You know, I don't know entirely. And by the way, Xyp9x himself could have been like this. In the early days of CSGO, Xyp9x was an entry fragger, had a monster AK, but he came onto a team that was filled with talent from top to bottom. So he just became that role player and he changed as a person. So I want to see where Valde goes on that road necessarily. What about Magisk? Obviously now back into the team. The problem with Magisk is it's way too emotional and in a negative sense. You see him rage, you see him just get depressed and frustrated. Again, the confidence is supposed to push through that. There's another great Kobe Bryant story where when he was injured during the year, I think it was like 2014, where he had his arm injury and he was healing from it. He was with a documentary filmmaker and he was watching a game where Deron Williams of the Nets was playing. And Deron Williams went like 0-9 and then he just stopped shooting for the rest of the game and thought, like, I'm having an off game, pass the ball more. And Kobe said some line to the filmmaker, like, if I go 0-9, then I'm going to go 0-30. And the notion was, I'm going to keep shooting. Like, my confidence tells me I've missed 9. Okay, cool. I'm going to make the next 5. I'm going to start to turn this around. That's the kind of mentality that I think you've got to have when things are going badly. Yes, things are going badly, but you're going to find a way through all this. You're going to find a way to get back to where you need to be. You're not going to let this hold you back and then think, I'm having an off game, or I better stop doing so much. Yeah, if you're a lesser player, you should. If you're the best player on your team, you have to win this game for your team. And that's where I think Magisk, for me, has always been a flawed player. Like, even when he was the best player in Dignitas/North, I always felt like his game was amazing. He had the cold zero type game and impact and amazing numbers and consistency for 3 to 4 months. But he didn't have a bit more than that where it felt like he would win no matter what, where he had the cold zero mentality of I'm going to do everything correct to win this game as well. His mentality didn't match up with his game in that particular sense. I also think you look at his whole career, including that period, I don't think he's figured out how to use his teammates, how to work with his teammates well. I think that's part of where the frustration comes from, and there's a big disconnect there. And so in a sense, he can sometimes be negative in terms of the confidence of teammates in that sense, because he can get his numbers and he can play well individually. But does he help his teammates? Does he improve his teammates? Does he play in a way that opens their game up and makes them more confident? I would say no. Finally, the other in-game leader, MSL. Like MSL's someone who has confidence in his strats, but even less so than a Glaive, because I actually feel like MSL, against certain teams, NIP is a classic example, SK would be another one, has shown a crippling lack of confidence. Even though he's had teams that matched up well, they had the right map pool to do it, they had the right chances to do it, they're always going to come up short. He's also been someone who's had too much confidence in the strat and as much as a refusal to change it up, thinking like, no, this is the right strat, if though it's not working and the parts of it aren't working because players can't execute it, like KGB's AWP isn't good enough against certain teams, he still keeps running it back. And so that, if anything, shows an insecurity to me that you don't want to come up with something improvised. You want to just stick with what you already planned, even if it's not necessarily going to work, and you're just going to hope it works. Kind of whack, right, if you think about it. So you look at the Nordic region in general, a lot of people, when I reel off some names now, are probably going to be shocked. They're going to think, oh, those are some weird names. Where are these other names I think of as great winners? Again, it's about balance. There were people in teams that made them look confident or won lots of championships. But these are the players for me who had the confidence in the game that elevated some of these teams. So if you look at the Nordic region in general, which again has been somewhat aided and plagued by the law of Jante, I would say this. Think of some of the epic winners who have that confidence. I would start out with Potty. There's a reason why in 2012, when I wrote my article explaining Neo versus Forest, who's the best ever, I made sure the first chapter was here's why Potty was the best ever before these guys, and you could still make a case he is now. Because this is a guy who always was a big game player. Didn't have the biggest numbers, big game player though. Always came to play, always delivered. This is a guy who delivered in the clutch, who could use every weapon, who had that basic kind of game where, because you knew he'd win his clutches and you knew he'd turn up and you knew he'd play well from his spots, other people now had a freedom in their minds where they could play a bit more. People like Fisker, even Heaton, etc. They knew they had that closer, that clutch guy there, and that opened their games up, and then they were massive multiple-time champions with all these great lineups they had. I think another one, a great one from Norway, would actually be Element, because this is a guy who, again, one of the most confident players I've ever seen. Outrageous confidence. Knew he could do anything in the game. Knew he could, because his game benefited his team so much that he would bring others up to his level. Could go to multiple different teams, more teams than anyone else, and bring them in championship level form. Another Norwegian player, Executor. Now, more in the early days when he was more of an individual star, but he was such an amazing clutch round player, and he had such an amazing ability to play on land from day one, where other people were still figuring it all out. This is a guy who was built to win. Now, yes, in the later days, he became just an in-game leader and just a strat caller, and it wasn't there as much, but definitely early on, a very, very confident player and someone who really believed that almost, he was just good at games and he was destined to win. I think a great example, even though it was sadly short-lived, it was only for a couple of years he was at this level, thanks to Source, would be Zet, the NIP, later on SK Gaming player, at one point Complexity player in CGS. This is a guy who not only was a star player, not only played super aggro, think of Fur nowadays, pushing all day long on both sides, but did all of that while getting monster numbers and literally at the LAN, trash-talking the other players on the other team and ruining their confidence. His confidence made his own team confident, he put his team in a position to win, and it degraded the level of the opposition, frustrated them, tilted them. What a great player to have in that sense. Sadly, only lasted a couple of years. And finally, I will go ahead and I'll say Spawn. Because the thing about Spawn was, he's a great example of someone who was broken a bunch of times early in his career. He was considered an onliner, he choked on LAN, he never could do these amazing things. Then when he finally broke through, got his chance, got into SK, from there on out, he had a couple of years where this guy could do anything. He could use any weapon. He was like a pure hybrid who could be the best rifler in the world, but could also have an amazing impact AWP, had an amazing deagle, played well in clutches, could go against any level of team at any stack tournament. Again, pretty confident player, especially for his skill set. And it wasn't that he talked shit necessarily, but he exuded it to his team that, like, I'm the star player, we're the best team, we can do this. So in that sense, I think k0nfig, it's not just that they've lost his skill set and the ability to have this star aggro entry player, because, there's Kirby out there, there's great players like Device and Dupree and great in-game leaders like Glaive and MSL, and if Carrigan ever come out, there's a lot of talent in the Danish scene, arguably more than anything, but they are going to miss someone with the confidence level of k0nfig and what that could bring as well as his game. This video was supported by Dean Tanglis, Michael Allaire, Andreas Westerlund, Alex Adams, Gman, Twch, Jerky's Minion, Anthony, TGreb, Jake Petrucci, Yordan Tsenkov, Daniel Yordanov. Want to get exclusive teasers for my upcoming work? Submit questions for me or make suggestions for my content? Become a part of the ever-growing Scrilluminati via Patreon link in the description box below.